Ever feel totally exhausted for no clear reason, like you're coming down with something, but you're not actually sick? Or maybe you've had moments where your emotions swing wildly, your sleep is erratic, and you're asking yourself deeper questions about life, like, why am I here? And surprisingly, you might not be burnt out in the way you think. According to some, what you're experiencing could be the early signs of a complete transformation of consciousness, something often called ascension. Your body might be responding to an internal shift, an upgrade. This perspective claims that some people are going through real, measurable physical and emotional changes that reflect a deep spiritual evolution. You might notice symptoms that resemble illness, fatigue, headaches, even mood swings, but they aren't necessarily caused by stress, diet, or environment. Instead, this theory suggests your body is adjusting to higher energy frequencies, literally rewiring how your brain and body function. Sounds strange? Let's break it down in everyday terms. Imagine your smartphone getting a massive software update. For a while, it lags, reboots, and doesn't behave the way it used to. That's a lot like what proponents of Ascension believe is happening to people. You're not breaking down, you're upgrading. What feels like confusion or chaos might be your system reconfiguring itself to operate on a whole new level. Your body and mind are learning to process more light. Now, this isn't light in the flashlight sense. It's described more like a subtle energy that's tied to higher awareness, greater intuition, and a deeper sense of connection to others. Let's say you suddenly can't tolerate certain foods, loud noises, or even certain people the way you used to. Or you begin to feel emotionally overwhelmed by things you used to ignore. That might be your system detoxing from old ways of functioning and adapting to a more sensitive and intuitive mode of living. Many people say this shift begins quietly, maybe with a crisis, a loss, or even a moment of awe that makes everything else seem smaller. You might sleep more, feel drained for no reason, or crave time alone. Eventually, this deepens into new habits, like wanting to meditate, eat differently, or avoid drama. You might even start noticing coincidences more often, like seeing the same numbers or meeting the right person at the right time. So, is it real? There's no scientific consensus on ascension, and it's not universally accepted. But what's important is that many people feel it happening. Whether you interpret these changes as spiritual, psychological, or energetic, the effects are real enough to shift how someone lives. If you're feeling off, maybe you're not falling apart, you're waking up. This framework doesn't ask you to believe anything supernatural. It just offers a new lens. Maybe what's disrupting your life isn't a breakdown, but a breakthrough. Not everything unexplainable is imaginary, and not every headache is just a headache. In a world moving fast and full of surface-level answers, tuning into subtle changes could be the most grounded thing you do. If nothing else, this concept reminds us that discomfort doesn't always mean something's wrong. Sometimes it's the first sign that something much deeper is trying to emerge. What if your next big step isn't about doing more, but becoming more aware of who you really are? As you move into the second level of this transformation, it's important to understand something new. This process is highly individual, but it follows some consistent patterns. That means you're not alone, even if it feels like no one around you gets it. You're not losing control. You're outgrowing old systems that no longer work for you. You're breaking mental habits you didn't even know you had. We're all taught certain emotional and behavioral responses, like staying quiet to avoid conflict, ignoring gut feelings, or keeping busy to avoid discomfort. But during this stage, those patterns begin to unravel. You might feel like you're becoming too emotional or too sensitive, but what's actually happening is a reset. Your body and mind are learning to respond to life based on clarity, not conditioning. Take relationships, for example. You might start noticing that conversations feel more draining than usual, or that certain friendships suddenly feel shallow. This isn't about being antisocial. It's your system starting to reject what's not in alignment with your new awareness. Your nervous system is doing most of the work. Science shows us that the nervous system controls how we respond to everything: stress, rest, emotions. During this stage, your nervous system is adapting. It's trying to function without the old survival-based programming. That's exhausting, but it's necessary. Simple changes help. Prioritizing sleep, drinking more water, spending time alone without distractions. These aren't spiritual rituals. They're physiological tools. They give your body a break so it can recalibrate. Think of it like this. You're updating your entire operating system, not just changing the wallpaper. Old mental frameworks, like comparing yourself to others, chasing approval, or needing to be constantly productive, start to fall apart. That can feel like failure. It's not. It's a sign that you're moving from reaction to reflection, from automatic to intentional. You're not here to just survive. You're starting to respond to life in a new way. By the time you reach the third level of this shift, something becomes clear. You're not who you used to be, and that's not a crisis. It's progress. The confusion starts to lift, and small moments of clarity begin to break through. You feel calmer, less reactive. You start asking better questions, not out of panic, but from a genuine desire to understand what matters most. Clarity isn't about having all the answers. It's about noticing the noise and choosing to ignore it. At this level, you stop needing constant stimulation. You begin to disconnect from the habits that once distracted you. Binge watching, doom scrolling, overthinking. Not because they're bad, but because they suddenly feel empty. You're no longer trying to escape your thoughts. You're starting to listen to them. You also begin recognizing patterns. Maybe you realize you've been working jobs that never felt meaningful. Or you notice how often you say yes when you actually want to say no. These moments might seem small, but they're major signs that your awareness is shifting from automatic living to conscious choice. Your intuition gets stronger when your mind gets quieter. This doesn't mean you need to meditate for hours. It just means you start paying more attention to things that used to feel like background noise, like your gut reaction to a situation or the subtle feeling of something's off before a decision. You begin to trust your inner feedback system, even when logic says otherwise. Think about it this way. Before, your mind ran the show. Now, it's starting to cooperate with something deeper, something you don't have to explain, just feel. That's your intuition kicking in. Synchronicities start making more sense. You might hear a phrase repeated in totally unrelated conversations, or someone recommends a book you were already thinking about. These aren't random. They're like road signs showing that you're tuned into something bigger. The more you notice them, the more they show up. Physically, your body may still be adjusting. Headaches, pressure in the forehead, and unusual sleep patterns are common. These are real, not imagined. Your brain is adapting to a different way of processing, not just external information, but internal guidance. At this point, you might also feel called to change how you spend your time. Quiet moments become more valuable. You may naturally start journaling, walking alone, or exploring practices like breath work or mindfulness, not because someone told you to, but because it feels right. That's a sign you're becoming more aligned with your own rhythm. The third level is about turning inward and liking what you find there. You realize that the discomfort you went through wasn't for nothing. It was a clearing out phase. And now something stronger, quieter, and more authentic is starting to take its place. This is the turning point where seeking turns into finding. Level 4 marks a real shift. This is where the journey stops being internal only. You don't just feel different anymore. You start acting different. Your heart begins to open, and for the first time you realize how much emotion you've been carrying, ignoring, or suppressing. Emotional healing isn't about being positive. It's about being real. At this stage, many people suddenly feel more emotional. Tears come more easily, old memories surface, and past hurts show up without warning. This isn't regression, it's emotional release. You're clearing out emotional storage you didn't even realize was full. The interesting thing is your body holds these experiences too. That tightness in your chest, that gut feeling of dread, they're often physical echoes of emotional patterns you never got to process. As your system begins to shift, these come up, not to overwhelm you, but to clear space. Think of your emotional system like a cluttered closet. You can't fit anything new in until you take everything out, look at it, and decide what still fits. That's what's happening now. Forgiveness starts to make more sense, not as a virtue, but as a survival skill. People often confuse forgiveness with approval or weakness, but in this stage, it becomes obvious. Holding on to resentment drains your energy. Forgiveness isn't for others, it's for you. Letting go doesn't erase the past, it just frees you from being stuck there. You may also find your sense of compassion expanding, not in a fluffy or idealistic way, but in a direct and practical one. You begin seeing other people's pain more clearly. You recognize that behind anger is usually fear. Behind control is often insecurity. That changes how you interact. You might become less reactive, more patient, even with people who used to trigger you. Boundaries get clearer, not because you're angry, but because you value peace. As your heart opens, you realize not everything deserves your time, your attention, or your explanation. You begin to say no more often, not out of resistance, but out of respect for your energy. This is maturity in action, learning that love doesn't mean self-sacrifice. Emotional strength isn't about controlling feelings, it's about understanding them. This level isn't about achieving some ideal emotional state. It's about learning to navigate your emotions without avoiding, denying, or exaggerating them. You begin to feel everything more deeply, but also manage it with more clarity. You're not just reacting anymore, you're responding. That's a big difference. Level 5 is where your mind starts catching up to what your heart has already begun. The emotional groundwork is set, and now you start to see through the mental filters you didn't even know were shaping your reality. Most of your thoughts weren't really yours to begin with. At this stage, you begin to question the beliefs you've absorbed over time about success, relationships, authority, even your identity. You start asking, do I actually believe this, or did I just accept it without thinking? This is the mental detox phase. Think about how you learned to define normal. School, media, culture, and family all played a role. But level 5 is when you pull back the curtain and start noticing how much of your thinking was shaped by survival, not truth. Maybe you've always believed you had to work constantly to be valuable, or that showing vulnerability is weakness. In this phase, those beliefs come up for review. You begin replacing them with ideas that actually reflect your values, not your fears. Your perception of time and urgency starts to shift. You notice you're not as anxious about deadlines or rushing through life. You become more present. It's not laziness, it's clarity. You start to realize that not everything needs a fast response, and that space between stimulus and reaction is where your power is. In fact, one of the most practical changes at this level is that you stop overcommitting. You don't feel the need to fill every moment or explain every decision. Silence becomes more comfortable. So does patience. You begin choosing quality over quantity in everything, from how you work to who you spend time with. Decision-making gets easier, not because life gets simpler, but because you're clearer. You no longer need endless pros and cons lists. You start trusting your gut and your logic because they finally feel like they're working together. That's a sign your left brain and right brain are syncing up. You're not guessing anymore, you're sensing. This new alignment creates a calm confidence, not because you've figured everything out, but because you're okay with not knowing everything. That's maturity. That's growth. You stop outsourcing your thinking and start owning it. At this level, books, teachers, and external sources are still helpful, but you no longer treat them as absolute truth. You treat them as input, not instruction. That's the difference between following and integrating. You're forming your own conclusions based on experience, not just belief. This doesn't mean rejecting everything or becoming cynical. It means learning to think for yourself, clearly, calmly, and with depth. As you move into the highest levels of this process, something becomes clear. You're no longer just learning how to live differently. You are different. The transformation isn't something you're working on anymore. It's something you're living. Integration is when growth stops being a task and becomes your default. At this point, you don't need to constantly manage your mindset or analyze your triggers. You still experience life's ups and downs, but you navigate them with less drama and more stability. You've internalized what used to be practices. Emotional regulation, grounded awareness, and healthy boundaries are just part of how you move through the world now. When something goes wrong, your first response isn't panic or blame, it's observation. You pause, you assess, and you move forward without spiraling. That's what integration looks like in real life. You feel more connected, but also more detached. You care deeply, but without the emotional overload. You're aware of what's happening in the world, but you don't get stuck in helplessness. You feel connected to others without absorbing their stress. This isn't disconnection, it's discernment. You finally understand that compassion doesn't mean emotional entanglement. This level of balance is powerful. It frees up your energy so you can focus on what truly matters. Service, contribution, creativity, or simply being present with people. You stop needing the next step to feel fulfilled. You may still set goals and move forward, but there's no rush. You realize life isn't about reaching a peak or arriving at some finished version of yourself. It's about flow. Purpose isn't a destination. It's how you show up in each moment. This removes pressure. There's no longer the constant feeling of not there yet. You're here, and that's enough. Mastery isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. At the highest level, the idea of ascension stops feeling abstract. It becomes practical. You realize it's not about escaping life. It's about engaging with it from a place of grounded awareness. You live more honestly, love more freely, and lead more quietly, by example, not by control. You don't need to convince anyone of anything. Your presence does the work. So where do you go from here? You live your life. With awareness, with purpose, and without the constant need to prove, perform, or push. The journey continues, not because you're unfinished, but because growth is infinite. Whether you call it ascension, awakening, or simply becoming more yourself, the message is the same. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're evolving. Keep going. Stay grounded. Trust what you know. The work is real. The change is lasting. And the future, you're already living it.